Hi, welcome to session 4. So, in this session, we're looking at social change. You can also, as well, look at this as a development process because we are focusing on how societal structures or patterns change, sometimes positively or sometimes negatively. Um, So we'll try to understand the concept of social change, appreciate the roles of various factors in bringing about social change, and then we look at whether it is good to change or not, and also, of course, so that has to do with development and underdevelopment, of course. And then we try also to understand why some society resist change, even when it is deemed necessary. So, what is social change? So, any kind of alteration in the pattern of social organization within the social structures or social institutions within any society or any community that totals to social change. So there is some kind of transformation in nature, and of course, like I said, social change, if you can look at it from a development perspective, and therefore can be equated to development, because development itself is a transformational change, which can be positive in most cases. Well, in terms of economic, social, political, and psychological aspects or dimensions. So of course it's complex and multifaceted, just as development, the term development states. And when we look at social change, we also look at all those dimensions. So, in other words, change can affect any kind of social life in different processes. So, meaning that it can happen in one community while in another community it might not happen. Um, yeah, so even if it's within the same society. So, of course, there are factors that influence social change, and some can be internal to the society, while others can be external. And those that are internal, we refer to them as endogenous, and therefore are within the society that is changing. Could have to do with people distribution of facilities, for instance, or infrastructure within community. And then also could be exogenous, could be external, meaning that those factors that are beyond control by uh, human beings, such as, for instance, disaster. If disaster happens, then that definitely would bring about social change in a negative way, of course, but also in a positive way. Maybe in some communities, if it happens, there is some kind of corrective action that where people come together to start working together, and that could not have been realized maybe before the disaster. So let's take a look at the different categories of factors. So I've categorized them terms demographic, technological, cultural, political, economic, educational, environment, or could be also conflict or wars. Those could also bring about social change. So let's begin with demographic factors. So these have to do with the composition or characteristics of population. So it has to do with population growth factors or aspects. So it has to do with birth or death rates, and those of course have an impact on social change. Some positive rate, some negative rate, depending on the preferences of that particular society, of course. So, for instance, if there is high birth rate, then high birth rate in a poor society, that could result into high population, and then the population growth might not match with what the society can produce, and therefore can lead to famine or hunger, and then people suffer. But of course, in some other cases, from a political perspective, you find that population growth could lead to this. I mean, globalization, as for instance, different international agencies aim at trying to control population growth for the purposes of controlling climate change, and therefore this political governance at a global level can result in that. But in some societies or countries prefer population growth depending on the situation. For instance, in some country prefer to have uh, more boys, so that they can join the army, so that they can prepare for if any conflict rises up. But of course, from a social perspective, definitely it has an impact on health and education. For instance, health, population changes in terms uh, of birth. People can look at the idea of controlling population through birth control, and that's a positive change, because before that would not have happened. But others can, from an economic perspective, they can look at population growth from a market perspective, that the more people that there are there, the more the bigger the market it is. But negatively, it could also lead to unemployment, because there are no structures to cater for the growing population. So take an example in Uganda here, our pyramid shows that we have more youth than the old people, and this in itself is leading to unemployment. Um, so we look at demographic issue when in another session, which is on population. The second category is the technological factors, where we look at technological progress as a trigger for long-lasting social change. And of course, some sociologists say that technology changes society by changing our environment that we eventually adopt, and this change is often in material environment and adjustment, and often modifies customs and social institutions. Of course, that's indeed true. If we look at the impact of technology on education, for instance, the skills and knowledge that imparted in younger generations would definitely lead to future changes in social institutions and customs. The information communication mechanisms that change over time also benefit society at a certain phase. In the past century, you would see that the technology was still a little bit low, but now with time, technology has improved, and you have now, for instance, robots taking over industrial work, but that itself could lead to unemployment and the rest. Then you have also technology that triggers helps in the process of industrialization, and therefore leading to more production of goods and services, and of course leading to economic growth. And of course that also has to do with market structures. The category of culture, we are looking at the ideas, knowledge, values, and beliefs and inventions, but of course also change. We are going to look at this the issue of culture and socialization in the next session. So culture provides the base for innovations and discoveries because it's from those ideas within our culture that we tend to become innovative. And of course, that's why you will see, for instance, if you go to the Western world or the developed countries, you see them as being more innovative because of their culture compared to the developing countries. And of course, that this has an impact on aspects of society. So, for instance, yeah, we always marry culture and religion because the beliefs and values and other moral aspects match together in these two aspects of culture and religion. Um, so culture and religion have an impact on social institutions. For instance, yeah, if one African who is more conservative is more into producing many children, then if they are exposed and there is some cultural diffusion with the Western world, then there is the result would be a belief in nuclear families, and therefore now start you'll have society which changes from working through extended families towards nuclear families. Um, and then, of course, culture has an issue on education, issues to do with birth, issues to do with maybe, for instance, immunization, acceptance, uh, abortion, and the rest, and how, for instance, human rights are treated in that case. Culture also has an impact on education. If the culture is not more attached to formal education, then it will maintain the informal aspect of education, which is more to do with the other traditional ways of socialization. And of course, that also has to do with population growth and technology and innovation. Of course, culture and laws, we are going to later in the next session look at norms and, of course, laws, and we see that these go together because these prohibit how people should behave or should act. So there are some expectations. So culture definitely influences how, to some extent, how policies and laws would be framed depending on a particular society, and that itself can affect whether those laws or policies would influence change. Political factors. Here we look at the role of governance and legislation in bringing about social change. So think about the impact of governance, e.g., democracy. If there is some kind of monarchy or dictatorship, and then people are now exposed, for instance, to issues of human rights and liberty, then therefore participating in democracy and elections, that would itself lead to social transformation because people can be able to do whatever they want to do and therefore take charge of their lives. Then universal human rights versus development, of course, I've already talked about that in terms of think about the capabilities and functionings as part of the human development. Then you have public opinion, which is always more stronger in the means in as a means of change. You can look at this from a perspective of participatory development. That the more people come together and work together, the more there's likelihood that the community or society would of course create some levels of social change. I've already talked about laws and policies as of course indicators. Uh, think about the democratic kind of way of ruling or governance, or as initiators. Of course, laws and policies are meant to create particular changes or to provide solution to particular problems, or as integrators, of course, during implementation, then particular social policies. Let's say, for instance, in women over time now have been, there are laws and policies that have been trying to favor gender equality so that women can become as equal as men. There is economic factors, of course, which influence quality and quantity of social change. Think about the modes of production, what kind of goods are produced, or services that would lead to particular culture change, or religious change, or other political aspects of um, other political aspects of society. From a capitalistic perspective, yeah, you'll see that there is, where we have economic struggles and change. So moving from the communist or collective kind of economic structures towards capitalistic um, ways of economic production, where you have the controllers of resources, and while you have those who are working, and therefore some levels of exploitation. You can reflect it, you could reflect on the aspects of the conflict perspective, sociological perspective. Then also think about the impact of industrialization on how people change. We already talked about this, especially during the introductory session, where we are talking about the growth of cities and industrialization, therefore attracting people from different areas, and they come to work to earn more money, and that itself comes up with other issues such as growth of cities, urbanization. Then there is impact of capital and technology on production. Of course, the better the capital and technology, the more production you have, and therefore that leads to economic growth, which in sense is social change. And of course, impact of property rights and banking system. So you have banking system that is established, formally established, and that can help people to get collateral, or to use their resources as collateral and get money for investing as capital. And of course, you also have this idea of individual ownership of property rather than communal ownership of property. So if before people were owning land as a community, and therefore in that case an individual has no much power in how to use that particular resource. But if there is high respect of property rights, then individuals can own land, and therefore they have liberty to use it however they want, as long as they have capital to invest in. So you have that also. Now, the education itself plays an important role in social change, because, for instance, it has an impact on culture change itself, because the knowledge, the skills, the technology imparted in children, or those who are indeed learning, create some kind of level of awareness and enlightenment, and therefore can lead to new ideas and values, which could lead to social change. And of course, skills and knowledge could lead to human resources, and the better human resource can lead to better management of development processes, and therefore lead to social change. And of course, if we talk about the issues of political education and awareness, it means that the leaders and the mass population, the mass itself, could be aware of how political processes would go by learning them through maybe political education and public administration, and therefore leading to better decisions that would impact the general population. And of course, education has an impact on inequalities and equality. So the more, for instance, before women or girls were not going to school, but now they do because of social change, and therefore there's some moving towards some level of equality. But of course, also with education, for those who get educated, they become more knowledgeable, can earn those skills and knowledge using it to get occupation for better occupations, and therefore have more money compared to those who do not go to school. So that also you have that balance. There are also environmental factors. Of course, this can be categorized under, for instance, the exogenous factors. We talked about those at the beginning of this session. For instance, climate change can cause slow or sudden social change, desertification and droughts. Their impact on agriculture, for instance, which could lead to destruction of agricultural product. I mean, reduction in agricultural production, and of course, but in another way, it can influence people to innovate through irrigation processes. So all those could be part of the social change. Or earthquakes and other disasters could cause the same. Wars and conflicts are also part of the factors that could lead to other issues. For instance, migration. So you migrate, there is displacement, migration, and of course refugee influx in other countries, and therefore people tend to now become detached from their original traditional cultures, and they have to adopt new cultures, and that's it should change itself. But it can conflicts and wars can also lead to poverty levels, and therefore that's underdevelopment or social change in a negative way. But it can also lead to depopulation because people are dying. It can, of course, decrease population. It can also lead to economic sabotage because infrastructures cannot play their role anymore. The market structures are destroyed, and therefore that is a negative social change. And of course, broken social relations between people because families are disintegrated and so on. Okay. Now, so those were factors. Let's now turn to advantages. So the big question would be, okay, is social change a good thing or not? So in other words, development a good thing or not? Of course, to one extent, yes, it is good, but some other extent, as we shall see, it isn't. But let's now first talk about the advantages of social change. So you have adoption of new life, which is more modern compared to traditional ways of life. You have new means of communication. Think about how now it is easier for you to communicate with your parents or people across the globe, because there are better communication methods rather than the traditional ones where they are using artifacts such as drums of communication, something like that. You have new technology and increased production in sectors because of social change. Think about industrialization or robotics in industries. You have knowledge, skills, and values acquisition for better societies, maybe through cultural diffusion and education. You have new people and new relationships and social groups. I mean, if you look at your Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, there are people you wouldn't have met if there was no such kind of technology or social change. Because now the world is now more open than ever before. Then you have new culture through diffusion. You have solidarity and unity through new laws and social protection programs, because now those are meant to protect individuals. But of course, from a negative perspective, those social change also disintegrates people, therefore bringing some kind of disunity because people are fighting over properties. So we'll look at that in the next slide. There's improved social facilities and institutions, hospitals because equipped with better health services and so on. And then you have also new methods of solving environment problems. Okay. So the disadvantages of social change could include cultural erosion through diffusion because people adopt new ways of life. I mean, think about, I'm sure sometimes you experience it with your parents, the way they behave. You look at them and it's okay. In our generation, we are doing things like this, but my parents are doing so. That kind of, because for you are exposed compared to what your parents might have gone through. Okay, then there is environmental change, challenges through industrialization. So think about pollution and uh, think about urbanization and slum development. Then there is family breakdown and social relations, widened gap among social inequalities. But of course, uh, then there is migration and deviance and crime, high crime rates resulting from population growth, and of course urbanization and industrialization. And then there is insecurity and competition of resources because of technologies, discoveries, and innovation. But sometimes societies resist change, and there are several factors. So you find that in some communities or societies, they still backward because they cannot adopt new changes. And some of the reasons could be that societies are fearing the unknown. I mean, we you've had people tell you, okay, we don't want to change because we do not know where we are going. Um, and so that kind of fear or anticipating negative outcomes if change happens. There is also perceptions and beliefs about change, how people take a particular kind of development processes also matter. Of course, the level of aspiration and need for achievement also matters. If you find people who are not zealous enough to create change or become change makers, then that would create some resistance for social change. And of course, capabilities and competencies and knowledge and skills, if they are limited, then that itself could lead to resistance because people cannot afford uh, to 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 use the capacity they have to create such change. And you'll find that in some cases, communities depend much more on historical heritage and culture, believing, for instance, in particular structures that they possess some spiritual kind of uh, uh, powers that if they are distorted, then they would lead to some problems in the community. And of course, just like any other kind of change, people tend to weigh benefits and rewards that would result from such change. If the rewards and benefits are less, then people tend to resist such change. And there is also misunderstanding the need for change. There is also timing also matters. When does this social change happen? Of course, just like development in general, it's a long-term process. So we can't say that it will happen in one moment and then it stops. And of course, there is also a fear of who is bringing change. So you've had some people, if you're bringing aid or some kind of help, start questioning that why are you doing this, for what purpose, how do we benefit. So that kind of fear of who is indeed trying to bring about change. So all these could be part of the reasons why some communities are not developed or developed, because of these and other changes. So bottom line is that social change is a permanent feature of all societies, and it happens all the time. It just happens all the time, every day. It could be slow or sudden or dramatic, depending on the influencing factor, those that we just talked about earlier. It's a continuous and unending process, just like development, and it happens in every society every day. Excuse me, we experience it every day. And all societies, whether traditional or modern, are constantly evolving. And of course, while some events like wars and disasters, those the indigenous factors which bring about dramatic and sudden change may happen, rather than waiting upon those factors that bring about a long term kind of development. So you have those moments where you have uh, events or factors that bring about sudden kind of social change. So we just have to learn to manage social change in our society, and then become resilient to whatever comes our way. But you could become a change maker too. So it's not just about many people or your government or anyone. It also begins with you as an individual, because if you reflect on these reasons, then they are more individualistic than collective. So you could become a change maker too. So it begins with you. So when you get time, you can watch this video on YouTube. I have also embedded it in your Moodle page. You can watch it and see how some people are actually becoming change makers and acting towards transforming the world, therefore creating social change. Thank you.